The warp projection chamber of the Galactic Council smelled faintly of ozone and institutional smugness. It had smelled that way for 12,000 years, ever since the Oracle engine first hummed to life in its crystalline pillar at the chamber's heart, a machine so vast, so precise, that entire civilizations had surrendered without firing a shot the moment it published their odds. The Oracle did not guess. The Oracle did not estimate. The Oracle knew, and tonight it knew this. The human relief force bound for the occupied colony of Slanding would be annihilated in exactly 5 hours. Counselor of the Ascendant Tier read the projection aloud with the bored cadence of a being who had watched 100 species learn their expiration dates. His 4 golden eyes swept the amphitheater, where delegates from 300 worlds glittered in their tiers like expensive insects. 10 million simulations, he announced. 10 million defeats. The Dominion holds the fortress. The humans send 12 soldiers. He let the number hang, savoring it. 12. The Oracle projects total human casualties within 5 standard hours. Motion to withhold counsel, intervention on grounds of mathematical futility. The chamber rippled with the dry, clicking laughter of the galaxy's oldest civilizations. In the lowest tier, where the air recyclers wheezed and the seats still had cushions from the previous geological era, a junior analyst named Blip raised one trembling tentacle. Honored Counselor, the simulation models humans under standard bipedal soldier doctrine, but my research suggests humans don't entirely have doctrine. They have something they call vibes and caffeine. The Oracle doesn't account for caffeine. The laughter that followed was no longer dry. It was thunderous, humiliating, the kind of laughter that follows a being home and waits for it in the dark. Wiped a tear of mirth from his third eye. Caffeine, he repeated. The Oracle has predicted the collapse of the Empire to the minute, and the intern is worried about bean water. He opened a shimmering holographic ledger. A betting pool, colleagues. Odds against the humans, 6 million to 1. Wager generously. Blip sat down, cheeks flushing ultraviolet, and quietly saved a copy of his research. Somewhere beneath the humiliation, in the stubborn little chamber of his hearts where scientists keep their heresies, a single thought refused to die. The math only works if they behave. 80 light-years away, aboard the carrier USS II, the humans were not behaving. The briefing room held 12 men, one whiteboard, and an atmosphere of profound calm that Ambassador Squibb, the Council's official observer, a nervous gelatinous diplomat currently the color of anxiety, found deeply unnatural. On the whiteboard, someone had drawn the fortress. Also a shark. The shark was wearing sunglasses. The shark appeared to be load-bearing to the plan. Lieutenant Commander Jake Preacher stood at the front, and this was the first thing anyone noticed about Preacher. He was quiet the way deep water is quiet. He had a voice made for reading bedtime stories and eyes that had watched doors get kicked in on 4 planets. He tapped the fortress sketch once. Shield generators here. Power grid's original construction, which means it's built to spec, which means it's built to their spec. A thin smile. Bless their hearts, Boomer. Master Chief Dan Boomer unwrapped a cigar he was legally forbidden from lighting aboard ship and pointed it like a professor's baton. Their shield harmonics cycle every 40 seconds. That's not a shield, that's a metronome. I put a charge here. He tapped the board and the whole grid sings soprano. He grinned at Squibb. Demolition's just music you feel in your fillings, little buddy. The storm, Squibb quavered, consulting his flickering data slate with 3 pseudopods at once. Your insertion window coincides with a Category 4 electrical storm. The Oracle itself flags night drops in such conditions as statistically suicidal. Statistically, said Petty Officer Tex, a man who had never in his life been to Texas and defended the nickname like sacred ground, is a word people use right before they lose. He was cleaning his rifle with the unhurried tenderness other men reserved for newborns. The storm masks our heat signatures, Preacher explained gently. Their sensors will be reading lightning, will be the lightning. He capped the marker. Questions. Doc raised a hand. Yeah, if I get hit, do I still have to hear Tex's playlist on? Pain don't hurt, Tex said solemnly. That's my line and it's from Roadhouse, and you butchered the delivery. The briefing had lasted 4 minutes. Squibb checked his chronometer twice to confirm this, because pre-battle liturgies ran 9 days minimum, and council engagement protocols filled 400 pages before addressing the question of whether to engage at all. These humans had planned an assault on an impregnable fortress in the time it took Squibb's species to clear its throats. Where, he asked faintly, is your engagement doctrine, your contingency matrices, your... Preacher tapped his own temple. Right here, filed alphabetically, somewhere between the Gettysburg Address and the lyrics to On a Prayer. But then, and this was the moment Squibb would replay for the rest of his long, jellied life, the room changed. Preacher pulled up a single image on the main display. The colony of landing before the invasion. Prefab houses. A school with a hand-painted sign. A little girl on some kind of wheeled contraption, frozen mid-laugh. 1,400 colonists in that fortress's shadow, Preacher said, and the bedtime story voice was gone. What remained was flat and cold and absolutely certain. Miners, teachers, kids, they took their home in an afternoon because the galaxy's finest minds ran the numbers and decided 1,400 people weren't worth the fuel. He looked around the room at 12 faces that had gone equally still. The council says we lose in 5 hours. Fine. They're entitled to their math. He picked up the shark drawing, folded it, and slid it into his breast pocket like a photograph of family. We're entitled to prove it wrong. Gear up. Wheels up in 30. Nobody cheered. That was what unsettled Squibb most. They simply rose, unhurried, and filed out, and Boomer paused at the hatch just long enough to lean toward the ambassador, cigar clamped in a wolfish grin. Hey, Squibb, that betting pool your council's running, 6 million to 1. He pressed a crumpled ration voucher into a bewildered pseudopod. Put me down for $20 on us. Alone in the empty briefing room, Squibb composed his report with shaking appendages, transmitting across 80 light-years to a chamber full of laughing immortals. Alert. The humans intend to attack at night. In a storm. On purpose. They planned it in 4 minutes. They are wagering on themselves. He hesitated, then added the sentence that would one day be carved above the council's doors, though no one could know it yet. Honored counselors, I do not believe the Oracle has ever met a human. Far away in its crystalline pillar, the Oracle engine ran its simulations again. 10 million battles, 10 million defeats. 5 hours, it concluded, serene and certain. The machine had never once been wrong. It had 5 minutes left to enjoy that. Warlord the Unyielding had conquered 31 worlds, and he had conquered them all the same way, by the book. The book in question, the Codex of Honorable Annihilation, ran 11,000 pages and had memorized everyone. Tonight, on the storm-lashed battlements of Landing, he stood exactly where the book said a warlord should stand. Beneath banners, the book said a warlord should fly. While 10,000 drone soldiers gleamed in parade formation below, rain pinging off their chassis like applause. The Oracle had transmitted its blessing hours ago, victory in 5 standard hours. Had the battle scheduled accordingly. Hostilities at midnight. Hydration break at the 90-minute mark. Triumphant gloating penciled in for dawn. Commence the declaration of hostilities, he rumbled, and his herald unfurled the ceremonial scroll. 45 minutes of formal grievances, read aloud in 3 languages, as civilization demanded. The herald had reached paragraph 2, when every light in the fortress died. Minute 1. They came down through the storm itself, 12 black shapes falling through cloud strobe and thunderclap, and the fortress sensors dutifully cataloging lightning, per specifications never blinked. Preacher hit the generator roof in a crouch, rain hammering his shoulders, and keyed his mic once. Around him, 11 soft impacts, 12 for 12. Somewhere below, Boomer was already kneeling at the shield generators, humming flank like a safecracker greeting an old friend, pressing charges into the seams with a lover's precision. 40-second harmonic cycle, he murmured. 1, 2, 3, 4. I declare a thunder war. He spun the detonator dial, stepped back, and the generator became a bloom of white fire and modern art. The great shimmering dome over the fortress flickered, sighed, and shut off like a bar at closing time. Minute 2. In the fortress command center, alarms screamed in polite regulation tones, bellowed for status reports and received instead from every loudspeaker on the installation at once, a sound his species had no framework for. A guitar riff, feral and ascending, followed by a shriek of pure electrified joy. Text jacked into the PA network with a grin cranked thunderstruck to volumes the codex would have classified as a war crime. Below, 10,000 drones froze mid-formation, their audio analysis protocols built to decode enemy communications for tactical content seized upon the transmission and began parsing it. Analysis, reference, struck past tense to strike, tactical meaning, unknown, reanalyzing, steam curled from drone heat vents across the parade ground. Several units simply sat down in the rain, processors whimpering, forever changed. Told y'all, text drawled to no one. Statistically, nobody's ready for young. Minute 3. The command center's blast door was rated against plasma, particle beams, and siege ordnance. It was not rated against Doc's shotgun taking its hinges off at contact range while Preacher announced, pleasantly, knock knock. Whirled from his dead consoles, mandibles wide with outrage, 7 feet of chitin and ceremony. Vermin, you violate the sacred sequence of battle. The declaration was not completed. The formations were not acknowledged. Where is your herald? Where are your banners? I demand you observe proper engagement etiquette. Preacher lowered his weapon a fraction, courteous, unhurried, rain still dripping from his brim, and delivered the sentence that would echo through galactic history, launch 10,000 scholarly papers, and defeat translation engines on 300 worlds. Sir, this is a Wendy's. Stopped. His tactical mind, honed across 31 campaigns, spun uselessly against the phrase like a drone parsing AC/DC. Wendy's. Proper noun, a place, a deity, a designation of territory. He would still be turning it over decades later in quieter times over franchise paperwork. But that came after. Now there was only the storm, the music, and 12 polite invaders standing in his sanctum 4 minutes ahead of the Oracle's earliest projection. Minute 4. Orbit, the flagship inevitable consequence, pivoted its dorsal batteries toward the fortress, targeting arrays awakening with a predator's patience. On the gunnery deck, Firemaster Thrax called for a firing solution and received on every targeting screen simultaneously a grainy human transmission, a mustached colossus in yellow, tearing his own garment asunder while crowds roared, looping endlessly, VHS static crackling like gunfire. The cyber warfare officer tried 17 countermeasures. The colossus ripped his shirt 17 more times. The officer slid slowly beneath his console and wept, and no one judged him. Minute 5. Sklaw hovered over the fortress's last live console, the self-destruct, the honorable end, page 9000 of the codex. Then he heard it, a small, absurd, mechanical tick-tick-tick. Boomer had strolled in past the guard's dock was zip-tying and placed on the console with tremendous ceremony a battered kitchen egg timer, dial twisted to 3 minutes. Then he clamped his cigar between his teeth and struck a match on ceremonial breastplate. Here's the situation, Chief. Puff, glow. When that dings, so does this building. Now my colleague here, he nodded at Preacher, he's the merciful one, me I just like the noise, so, tick tick tick. What's it gonna be? Looked at the timer, at the cigar, at 12 rain-soaked primates who had unmade 31 worlds worth of doctrine in the time his herald took to clear his throat. 11,000 pages of codex offered him nothing, so he reached for something older than any book and laid his sidearm on the console. I yield, said the unyielding. The egg timer, which was connected to absolutely nothing, dinged cheerfully into the silence. Boomer pocketed it. Good talk. Battle runtime, 5 minutes 12 seconds. 80 light-years away, the council chamber had gone very, very quiet. The live tactical feed hung over the amphitheater like a verdict, its projection frozen on the words battle CONCLUDED. 300 worlds worth of delegates stared. The betting ledger hovered beside it, 6 million to 1 odds curdling in golden light. Transmission error, said for the 4th time. His voice had lost its cadence. Recalibrate the relay. They recalibrated the relay. The feed sharpened obligingly, text teaching a captured drone to nod along to the chorus. 1,400 colonists spilling into the rain-washed streets, miners, teachers. A little girl on a wheeled contraption doing loops of joy around a soldier who knelt to her height. And Boomer, looking directly into the fortress's surveillance pickup, holding up a crumpled ration voucher, mouthing words every lip-reading algorithm in the chamber translated at once. Pay up. In the lowest tier, Blip watched with all his heart's hammering and did 2 things. First, he opened his heretical research file in it. Human variables. I told you so. Second, he began quietly composing a job application to the human embassy. But it was the oracle that silenced the chamber for good. The crystalline pillar flickered, something no delegate had witnessed in 12, and across its ancient displays, a single line of text appeared, humble as a confession, terrifying as scripture. RECLCULATING. The machine had been wrong, and in the deep dark beyond the council's maps, something vast and patient, something that had been counting on the oracle being right, began to move. 12 hours after the fastest battle in recorded history, the galaxy had stopped working. Not the machinery, the people. On 400,000 worlds, across every species that had ever bent a knee to an oracle projection, commerce and governance, and wore all ground to a halt because everyone, everywhere, was watching the same footage. The 5 minutes of landing had gone galaxy viral within an hour of transmission. Scholars slowed it frame by frame like sacred text. The clip of the mustached human colossus tearing his garment was analyzed by 700 universities, 3 intelligence agencies, and 1 monastic order that declared it a koan. Surrender face, that precise instant of chitinous bewilderment, was already being minted onto commemorative coins by an enterprising, who could not stamp them fast enough. The Dominion, terror of 3,000 years, had become the galaxy's punchline overnight, and empires, it turned out, could survive defeat far more easily than they could survive being funny. But in the Council's war projection chamber, no one was laughing. The Oracle engine stood in its crystalline pillar at the chamber's heart, and for the first time in 12,000 years it was being questioned, not consulted, interrogated. Circled it like a prosecutor, his golden eyes bloodshot, his betting ledger 6 million to 1, catastrophically honored, deleted but not forgotten. Explain the failure, he commanded. The oracle's voice filled the chamber, serene as ever, though the delegates would later swear they heard something new threaded through it, something almost like embarrassment. Diagnostic complete. All 10 million SIMULATIONS modeled human COMBATNTS as rational actors. A pause. 300 worlds of delegates leaned forward. This assumption was optimistic. The Oracle began to list its errors, and the list was a eulogy for its own infallibility. Subject DSIGNATED, Boomer, was ASSIGNED 87% probability of withdrawal under fire. Subject instead advanced toward the largest available explosion while QUOTING, a cultural artifact titled Die Hard. Subject DSIGNATED, TEX, DPLOIDAN audio, weapon this engine classified as entertainment, non-tactical, reclassification pending. Subject DSIGNATED, DOC, TREATED, a plasma burn while informing the patient that pain does not hurt. This statement is medically false. The patient RECOVERED anyway. This engine cannot explain WHY. The crystalline pillar flickered that impossible stutter again, and then the Oracle engine, oldest mind in known space, predictor of the fall of empires, asked the first question of its long existence. Query, what is a yippee-ki-yay? In the lowest tier, intern Blip covered his face with two tentacles and felt something dangerously close to vindication. The humans arrived an hour later. Protocol demanded that visitors to the sacred chamber approach along the path of humility, robed, silent, eyes down. The 12 SEALs came up the path in flight suits, carrying gym bags, discussing loudly whether the council's architecture was more Star Trek or more Vegas. Tex voted Vegas. Doc pointed out the load-bearing crystal and voted Vegas that thinks it's Star Trek, which Preacher ruled the winner. They reached the ancient negotiating table, carved from the heartwood of a tree that had died before Earth had fish. And Boomer put his boots up on it with a contented sigh, as if the table had been waiting 11 for exactly this. Ambassador Squibb, hovering nearby in an anxiety-mauve shade, made a sound like a kettle deciding not to boil. Honored counselors, Preacher said, and though his boots stayed on the floor and his voice stayed gentle, every delegate in the chamber found themselves sitting. You asked for a debrief. Here it is. You had 1,400 civilians under occupation, a math machine telling you they weren't worth saving, and 300 civilizations who took that answer and went to lunch. He let that sit. We didn't. That's the whole debrief. Everything else is technique. Technique, repeated the delegate from Prime, a towering being with 4 stomachs and unimpeachable dignity. The audio assault, the shirt-tearing transmission, these were calculated. Ma'am, everything we do is calculated, said Boomer. We just use math you don't have yet. He rummaged in his gym bag and produced a strip of something leathery, offering it to her with the solemnity of a treaty gift. Beef jerky, teriyaki, trust me. What happened next entered religious canon. The delegate accepted the offering into her first stomach, then her second, and by the third her 4 eyes had gone very wide and very still, and by the fourth she announced, in a voice her aides had never heard, that she now understood why humans feared nothing. 2 smaller delegations immediately requested samples. Squibb, translating cultural context at frantic speed, found himself explaining to a cluster of horrified traditionalists. No, honored ones, you misunderstand. When a human says, hold my beer, that is their declaration of hostilities. Complete and legally binding. Runtime, 3 seconds. And through it all, Blip watched from the cheap seats, clutching his research file, gathering courage the way small creatures do in silence, in increments. Finally, during a lull, he slipped down the tiers and approached the most terrifying beings in the galaxy with his file held out like an offering. Sirs, I wrote a paper before the battle about your variables. Nobody read it. His color cycled through 3 shades of mortification. I predicted you would win. My margin of error was 4 minutes. I apologize for the imprecision. The chamber's noise seemed to recede. Preacher took the file, read the title, Human Variables. And looked at this small, trembling analyst who had been laughed out of the room for being the only one paying attention. When he spoke, the bedtime story voice was back, and it was dead serious. You were the only mind in this building that got it right, and you got it right scared. He handed the file to Boomer, who whistled at the marginalia. That's the job, kid, not the math. The nerve to say it out loud. He extended his hand, and Blip, who had researched the gesture extensively, extended a tentacle, and across that handshake something shifted in the galaxy's oldest room, the quiet transfer of the future from the tears that laughed to the intern who didn't. Watched the handshake, and to his own considerable surprise, felt no outrage. Only exhaustion, and beneath the exhaustion, something ancient and rusted turning over for the first time in centuries. Doubt. He was still examining the sensation when every alarm in the chamber went off at once. Not the polite, regulation tones of the fortress. These were the council's deranged klaxons, the ones tuned to frequencies that bypassed thought and went straight for the spine. The chamber's great display bloomed with telemetry from the listening posts at the galaxy's ragged edge, the dark margins beyond the oldest maps, where even the Oracle's projections went thin. Something was inbound. The display struggled to frame it, recalibrating scale 3 times, and each drew a worse sound from the delegates. 50,000 ships, moving as one organism, one intelligence, one appetite. Signature analysis resolved, and the chamber's lights seemed to dim on their own. The Hive, the Oracle said quietly. Designation confirmed. Analysis. The Zeraxi assault on Kepler's landing was not an invasion. A pause that no machine should have needed. It was a sample collection. The Hive sent the Zeraxi to measure human resistance. This engine's defeat projection was intercepted, expected, desired. The Hive has been listning to my predictions for 1,000 years. They, attack only what I say cannot defend itself. The silence that followed had teeth. Every delegate understood at once. The galaxy's sacred, infallible oracle had spent a millennium unwittingly drawing up target lists for the dark. New projection, the oracle continued, and now the embarrassment in its voice had frozen into something colder. The Hive has annihilated the Kepler's landing engagement. They have adapted, accounting for all known human variables. The machine hesitated on the phrase as if crediting its sources, humanity's defense fails. Projected battle duration, 5 minutes. 300 worlds worth of delegates turned slowly to look at the 12 humans by the ancient table, looking for terror. Finding, instead, Boomer taking his boots down, standing, cracking his neck once each way, and turning to Preacher with a cigar already migrating toward the corner of his grin. 5 minutes, he said. He checked his watch. New record to beat. And far out in the dark, 50,000 ships began to accelerate, carrying with them, in their cold collective mind, a complete recording of the last 5 minutes humanity had fought, and the absolute certainty that lightning could not strike twice. The Hive arrived at Earth's outer defense line, the way winter arrives on a dying world, total, silent, and certain. 50,000 ships blotted the beyond Neptune, arranged in a lattice of such perfect coordination that human astronomers, watching through trembling telescopes, described it as a chandelier built by something that hates you. And the Hive was ready. That was the terrible part. Across 1,000 years of harvested worlds, it had never once prepared for prey. Prey did not require preparation, only appetite. But this landing footage had changed the calculus. The collective mind had watched the 5 minutes 11 billion times. It had trained a war intelligence on 40,000 hours of human cinema until the machine could quote Predator in the original growl. Audio filters stood ready to strangle any guitar riff at the first power chord. Hull plating had been re-engineered against improvised charges. Every feint, every prank, every yippee-ki-yay in the human arsenal had been countered and buried. The Hive's voice rolled across every human frequency at once, vast and toneless. We have learned your chaos, humans. We are prepared for your unpredictability. No madness remains that we have not modeled. In the council chamber, 80 light-years away and patched into the feed, 300 civilizations despaired. On the bridge of the flagship II, at the heart of humanity's absurdly outnumbered fleet, 12 Navy SEALs started laughing. It was not brave laughter or bitter laughter. It was the specific, delighted laughter of men who have just been handed a gift. Squib, hovering at Battlemov, could not comprehend it. Even Blip, newly hired, badge still warm, stationed at a console with human variables analyst printed on it in fresh ink, found his 3 hearts stuttering. They've studied you, he whispered. They've countered everything you are. Everything they think we are. Preacher stepped to the command dais, and the laughter around him fell away into something older and harder. He keyed the fleet-wide channel, and when he spoke, the bedtime story voice carried to every human ship in the line. All commands, this is actual. Listen carefully, because we will not repeat it and because it's the last thing they'll ever expect. A breath. Execute Fleet Order 1. By the book. Exactly by the book. For a moment the human fleet did nothing at all. Then it moved, and the galaxy watching through the Council's feed made a sound like a single indrawn breath. Perfect formations. Textbook wedge deployments out of a manual older than screens and pickets and firing lanes arranged with geometric devotion. Comms traffic snapped to crisp NATO phonetics, every transmission regulation length, every standard. No music, no jokes, no chaos. Just doctrine, flawless and gleaming, executed by the most disciplined killers humanity had ever produced. Because the galaxy had spent so long laughing at human madness that it had forgotten what the madness was built on. The Hive's war intelligence met the human line and began to search for the trick. It found formations and searched behind them for the ambush the movies had promised. It found none and concluded the ambush was deeper. It committed 3,000 ships to countering a feint that did not exist, then 5,000 more to flank a deception that was actually just a screening element doing its job. Every regulation maneuver read as camouflage for some unimaginable prank. Every by-the-book torpedo lock looked like the setup to a punchline. The collective mind, trained exclusively on chaos, began to consume itself. Across the lattice, coordination frayed as the intelligence screamed through its own circuits a question no harvester of 1,000 worlds had ever needed to ask. Where is the trick? The formation cannot be the trick. The formation is the trick. RECALCULATING. RECALCULATING. Firing solution, actual, Tex reported, voice flat as a parade ground, and if a man's soul could stand at attention, his did. Per the manual, page 212, paragraph 4. Weapons free, said Preacher. The torpedo spread that ended the Battle of Neptune was, by every technical measure, the most boring attack in human military history. Standard pattern, standard yield, standard everything. It sailed through the gap the Hive had torn in its own lattice while chasing phantom pranks, and it gutted the command ship, the node, the mind, the appetite, in one regulation-perfect blossom of fire. 50,000 ships shuddered as the collective intelligence collapsed, and across the human fleet, fire control officers who had trained their whole lives for chaos calmly worked their checklists as the chandelier came apart. On the bridge, Boomer looked at his watch and his grin could have been seen from orbit. 4 minutes, 58 seconds. He clamped the cigar in his teeth. Told you, new record. Preacher opened the all-frequencies channel one last time, to the dying Hive, to the Council, to a galaxy holding its breath, and delivered the sentence that would be carved beneath squibs warning above the Council doors, taught in academies on 400,000 worlds, and profoundly misunderstood by all of them. The most unpredictable thing a soldier can ever do is exactly what he was trained to do. The aftermath took longer than the battle, as human aftermaths always did. The Council formally retired the Oracle engine in a ceremony the old machine reportedly requested itself. Its final projection, freely offered, was that its replacement would work far better. The replacement was installed the following week. A red telephone, no dial, wired directly to a SEAL team-ready room on Earth. The brass plaque read, "In case of apocalypse, call humans. Expect hold music." The hold music was Eye of the Tiger. The delegate called it weekly, ostensibly for defense consultations, actually for the hold music and jerky shipments. Blip received his promotion in the great chamber where he had once been laughed into silence, chief human variables analyst. The galaxy's first alien whose entire job was watching 1980s films and taking notes, which he performed with the rigor of a born scientist and the joy of a born fan. Himself pinned the sigil on, and if his golden eyes were damp, the official record was diplomatically silent. And on a rebuilt's landing, beneath the fortress he had once commanded, the unyielding opened the galaxy's first Wendy's franchise, having spent his Reformation years researching the phrase that defeated him and concluding, with a warlord's thoroughness, that if it held such power, he wanted the distribution rights. He still did not understand why. Business was excellent. It was at the victory reception who asked the last question, quietly, the way one asks things one fears. "Commander, if the entire galaxy, all of us, every fleet if we ever turned on Earth." He hesitated. "How long would humanity last?" Preacher considered it honestly. Then he struck a match, lit Boomer's cigar for him, and shook the flame out. "5 minutes," he said, and let the silence do its work before the smile arrived. "For you guys." Somewhere overhead, on every human ship in orbit at once, Thunderstruck began to play.